I'm sorry, I heard my husband was brought in." As I ran into the treatment room, the eyes of the doctors, nurses, and my husband were all on me. I wondered at the momentary silence, but when my eyes met my husband's, I was assured that he was safe and that his life was not in danger for the time being. But the next moment was outrageous. My name is Tanya. I'm a 30-year-old nurse. My husband, Steve, is 2 years older than me and a government employee. Unlike my previous boyfriends, I was attracted to him because of his seriousness. I don't know if it's because of my profession as a nurse or my nature, but I don't have a hard time serving others, and I am happy when people depend on me. Hence, helping out my boyfriend, lending him money, and such things were a daily occurrence. Even though I knew in my head that I shouldn't do it, I would do it when I was asked to. Many of my fellow nurses are like that, and relationships are always a topic of our conversations. But then, a turning point came for me. I met my husband at a blind date with fellow nurses. He seemed quiet and serious. He was the type of guy I had never been around before, and I was attracted to him from the start. Other girls said he looked too serious or plain, and there were no rivals. We exchanged contact information after a strong push from me. I was also the one who asked him to go out with me. The relationship lasted 3 years. It's been a smooth relationship, with no conflict or betrayals. Many relationships break up after a few months, and it would have been better if the relationship had lasted a year, but with Steve it had lasted 3 years. I said to him, "Well, things are going to continue to go well. Shall we get married?" He proposed to me, and we got married. My husband had little dating experience, and his hobbies were reading and playing games at home. He was someone who rarely went out, but he was a bookworm and never ran out of topics to talk about. He is not a fan of the outdoors, but he seems to have a lot of gaming buddies, and we often play games while talking online. He says that since he started dating me, he has had more opportunities to go out. He was interested in it just because he didn't have anyone to go to, and he enjoys it wherever we go. My in-laws are a bit far away, about a 2-hour drive. I have the impression that my in-laws are gentle people. But Steve is the youngest of 3 siblings, and his in-laws are quite elderly, so we don't get to see them often. After meeting them at the wedding and the wedding ceremony, we only went to greet them once, at New Year's. We exchanged mid-year and year-end gifts, and I do call them, but I work nights, so our hours don't match, and I don't get a chance to talk to them very often. My husband and I go out somewhere when our days off coincide, and we do our share of the household chores. I thought we were doing well. However, it was about 3 months ago that I sensed something was wrong with my husband. When I came home after work, he was asleep on the sofa. A beer can was lying on the table. "You'll catch a cold," I said to him. He looked at me sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Isn't it unusual for you to be sleeping here and drinking beer?" I asked. "I was at an online drinking party with my gaming buddies. I was having too much fun and drank too much. I don't understand this world, but as long as my husband was having fun, I thought it was fine. But this was a mistake." After that, similar incidents continued, and one day when I saw my husband, I noticed that his hair had changed. "What's wrong with your hair?" He had never dyed his hair before, but now it was all done up and brown. "Is this hair okay at your job?" My husband is a government employee, and I thought he told me that the regulations are very strict. "What was wrong with it? I just thought recently that I should enjoy dressing up while I'm young. What do you think? Does it look good on me?" My husband was not a sophisticated man for his age, but he had suddenly changed, hadn't he? I'm not sure if it looks good on him or not, maybe because I'm not used to seeing it. But it doesn't look good on him. I didn't say it looked good on him. "Oh, I see," I simply replied. A few days later, he got his ears pierced. Again, I didn't think this looked good on him. Was he having a midlife crisis? I thought about that, but maybe he's having trouble with his job or something. "Hey, what's going on with you lately?" Unable to remain silent, I asked him straightforwardly, but he didn't give me a clear answer. "Nothing." And then my husband went to the bedroom. I knew I could not go on like this, but there was no one to fill in for the nurse who had retired not long ago, and I was so busy that I could no longer afford to pay attention to my husband. Around the time this was going on, Steve said, "My dad's not feeling well lately, so I'm going home for the weekend to check on him for a while." My father-in-law is old, and my husband must be worried about him. I nodded my head in agreement, and my husband began to leave the house every weekend. I tried to be considerate in my own way by cooking for him and texting him during work hours, but he rarely responded. Just when I thought it was time to have a proper discussion with him, I received an unbelievable call while I was at work. "Tanya, the police are trying to contact you." A colleague of mine called and passed the phone to me. "The police? Why?" I picked up the phone, feeling uneasy. He told me that Steve had been in an accident and had to be taken to the emergency room. What? What about my husband? Is he okay?" I was so upset that I questioned the police officer on the phone. He told me that he had heard it was not life-threatening and that he had been taken to our hospital where I worked. I rushed to the emergency ward. I asked the ward nurse where to find him and hurried to the treatment room. When I opened the door, I was met with the stares of the people there. "Excuse me, I heard my husband was brought in." The doctor looked doubtful, and the nurse's eyes swam. I felt uncomfortable, but when my eyes met my husband's, I was relieved. The nurse explained briefly. They said he had a leg injury that was so severe that they were going to cut his pants in order to treat him. When I looked at my husband again, his pants had already been cut off. Then, my husband, noticing my gaze, shouted, "Tanya, don't look at me!" What? I'm a nurse, and I wonder if my husband thinks it's embarrassing for me to see him have his pants cut off. Certainly that may be the case, but it's common sense to cut off clothing when you can't remove it normally due to injury. "Just get out of here!" my husband shouted. I stood there, not understanding what was going on. Even though my husband screamed, the hands of the doctors and nurses did not stop rushing to treat him. It was only natural. If I listened to every word they said, it might take too much time and stall the procedure. Suddenly, something extraordinary grabs my attention. "What is that?" I muttered to myself. On the inside of my husband's thigh was a tattoo. The injury being treated was on his left leg, while the tattoo was on his right leg. Fortunately, the right leg did not appear to be damaged, and the eye was drawn to the leg that had been injured. Scrawled onto the inside of my husband's thigh is someone's name. It seems to be a woman's name. Yasmin. Who? My husband continued to be shocked by my words, but I got out of there once the procedure continued. I talked to a fellow nurse in the emergency ward who told me that apparently my husband had not been brought in alone. She said she thought it was a couple who was married or dating because he was brought in with a woman his own age who had been in the accident with him. When he checked the name of the woman who was transported with him, her first name is Yasmin. It matches the name on the tattoo. Does this mean they were having an affair? I kept asking myself. My coworker said she had brown hair and pierced ears and also had a tattoo with his name on it. It didn't add up. I asked the nurse who treated the woman, and she told me that my husband's name was also tattooed on her inner thigh. I think it's safe to say they are having an affair. But what kind of nerve does a woman have to have the name of her cheating partner tattooed on her body? I can only think that she must be unstable. As I was thinking this, I remembered the call from the police. The police first called my mother and father-in-law's house, but my in-laws cannot drive, so they asked where I worked and called me. This means that my in-laws must be worried. So I called their house, and my father-in-law answered, "Is Steve gonna be all right?" He was worried, so I told him that Steve had been in an accident and had been taken to the hospital, but was not in life-threatening condition. My father-in-law's voice told me he was clearly relieved. So I asked him, "By the way, Dad, have you been feeling better?" My father-in-law said he had no idea what I was talking about. I clarified, "Because Steve said you were not feeling well and he's been gone every weekend. He said he was taking care of you." I had no idea. It was all a lie. I was relieved to hear that my father-in-law was in good health and that there was nothing wrong with him during his recent medical checkup, but the problem was, where was my husband going? If it wasn't to my in-laws' house, then it must have been to the place where he was having the affair. But I had no proof. After finishing my working hours, I went home without seeing my husband, who was admitted overnight for treatment. I went home and began to go through my husband's belongings, thoroughly examining them. The evidence was easy to find. I found photos of him with this woman, hotel receipts, and even an email confirmation for reservations to a romantic resort. According to the schedule, they must have had this accident on the way home from the resort. The accident was a car crash on a mountain road. No one else was injured, and neither Steve nor this Yasmin woman appeared to be in life-threatening condition. However, since Steve had injured his leg, and it might be difficult for him to walk properly for a while, normally I should be worried about him as a wife. But I don't have that feeling anymore. I couldn't believe he lied about visiting his parents, saying he was worried about them, much less was lying to cover up an affair with another woman. I wondered if Steve's recent strange behavior, such as dyeing his hair and getting his ears pierced, was due to the influence of this woman. I told a fellow nurse and asked her to refer me to a lawyer who was good at divorce matters. The next day, I headed to the hospital room with my husband's belongings. My husband seemed to have hit his head and was so confused that he could not remember what had happened in the treatment room yesterday. Honestly, I didn't even care about the truth anymore. I left the hospital room without even having a conversation with him because I had a shift to get to. When I finished work, I went to see my lawyer and told him what happened. He told me that with that much evidence, I would have enough to sue. I just wanted to get a divorce as soon as possible. I couldn't have that man come out of the hospital and live in the same space. I felt so betrayed by my husband that my anger outweighed my sadness. From there, I found a new place to live and moved out on my own. Only my husband's belongings remain in the house. I planned to be patient until the day my husband was discharged from the hospital. I thought about divorcing him while he was in the hospital, but he is in the hospital where I work, so it would be troublesome if something happened to him there. Then, we could get a divorce when he gets out of the hospital. I drove to pick my husband up from the hospital. I have to make a quick stop. Please come with me. He looked at me strangely, but nodded. I headed for a family restaurant near our house. When I entered the restaurant with my husband, the lawyer was waiting for us. My husband looked at me as if he didn't understand what was going on, but I guess he was tired of standing on a leg that was not fully healed yet. He sat down quietly, and I thrust the divorce papers at him. "Divorce? Why?" my husband shouted in a crazy voice. I seethed in my anger silently for a moment. "What do you mean, why? You had an affair. You even had your accident on your romantic trip. The evidence of your affair was found in our own home. What do you think you're doing? Besides, you lied about your father not feeling well. You lied about going to your parents' house to see this woman." My husband's face turned pale. "You think I am naive? Yasmin, the woman you were having an affair with, is out of the hospital. I heard that her injuries were less severe than yours. I can't believe she was brought to the hospital where I work." I smiled wryly, and my husband's face turned even paler. "You will pay for the anguish you've caused me." I handed him the divorce papers and a pen. My husband did not take the pen. "Is it only your leg that's injured, or have you lost the use of your hand as well?" I sarcastically said to him, and he finally picked up the pen. But he wouldn't sign. He only stared at the paper. "Why don't you sign it? Are you scared at the idea of starting over? You think this was just some game?" My husband froze, as if I had hit the nail on the head. I gave him a cold stare. "You're kidding, right? I can't be with my husband with the cheater's name tattooed right on his body." He looked at me in surprise. What? What are you talking about?" He may have been trying to deceive me, but I was unmoved. "You really don't remember? I was there when you were rushed to the emergency room. You were yelling at me not to look." Then my husband's face changed color. "Sound familiar? I saw the tattoo on the inside of your thigh, too. But what kind of a man tattoos his mistress's name on his body? Even if we didn't get divorced, do you think you can hide it from me?" My husband was slack-jawed. "No, it's not. That's not it," he said. I could only sigh at the sight of my husband. Dyed hair, pierced ears, and tattoos, and with the name of the person you cheated on your wife with? At least do it after you get divorced. While Steve was in the hospital, I actually met Yasmin face to face. I didn't go out of my way to see her or anything. We just bumped into one another. She was lost in the hospital, looking for the gift shop, and she asked me for directions. The gift shop is just around the corner. Oh, and you're Yasmin, right? My husband is Steve, I said as she checked my nameplate, turned pale, and left at a speed that was hard to believe for an injured person. Please don't run in the hospital, I called after her. I think she was more embarrassed than I was. She probably heard from Steve that I worked here, but she probably never thought she would run into me at such a big hospital. Quite the stroke of luck. Seeing how my husband said he would rather start over with me than with someone he was supposedly loved enough to get a tattoo, I asked my Steve if he had been dumped by Yasmin. Steve didn't think I would ever find out, and apparently would rather suffer and stay married to me rather than have me file for alimony. I can't believe he thought he wouldn't get caught with her name tattooed on his body, and breaking up with him wouldn't erase the fact that he cheated on her, though. Nurses have a high rate of attracting the wrong kind of men. I'd been the same way, but when I married Steve, I thought he was a serious man and that he wouldn't betray me. And then, he was stupid enough to get a tattoo of the person he cheated on me with, which is the worst thing ever. I'm so blind. I'll leave the rest to the attorneys, and I hope I never see him again. The lawyer looked at me and nodded. I've moved out, so you'll have to get a cab or whatever to get home on your own. Bye. My husband looked at me with a pitiful face, his mouth agape. He would probably be crippled until his leg wound healed, but he deserved it. After that, I was divorced without incident. I also got alimony. Thanks to that, Steve was left broke and bankrupt. To his surprise, he found out that Yasmin was married to a colleague from his office, and they had actually found out by chance that he and her husband were online game buddies. Of course, Yasmin's husband filed a claim for alimony against her as well. I heard that Steve had to quit his job, and the rumors just keep on spreading. But I got the alimony paid, and I don't care if Steve quits his job or not. After the divorce was finalized, my former in-laws contacted me, but they were furious when I politely explained the situation. They apologized to me and said they would never let Steve hurt me again. This time, the word spread among my fellow nurses, but they all laughed it off, and I am still laughing my way through it. Now, I live alone, and I'm free to do whatever I want.